Good evening once again. My name is Sibusiso Maneli, and today we're here again having another one of those interesting conversations where we speak about Party Funding Act in South Africa. And today we're having two amazing guests, Robyn, who works for My Vote Counts, and Sibusiso Maneli, who's a student at the University of Cape Town. And I'll just briefly read their biographies. Robyn is a political party funding researcher for My Vote Counts. She looks at mostly on political party funding, engaging with stakeholders, creating awareness on the need for the party funding frameworks and public education. She holds a BA in International Relations, BA Honors, cum laude, and Master's Candidate in Political Science at the University of Cape Town. And we also have Sibusiso Maneli, who is a Master's Candidate of Philosophy in Development Policy and Practice at the University of Cape Town. He has a BA and BA Honors from the University of Western Cape. And so is currently running a bit late due to some technicalities. And so for now, we'll start with Robyn. Robyn, welcome. Thank you for taking your time and joining us at the Wesley Guild SA.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you for having me. My first time here, and I'm sure it'll be a really great discussion.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of those conversations, and really we need to have it more because I think it influences a lot, and would hear from you on how much of it influences our day-to-day.
Yeah, definitely.
I got interested on it more. I've been following My Vote Counts and engaging more on it, on the content, and with the recent publication on the percentages on who's funding and how much, I was like, oh my word, because there needs to be a context of what that means for us. I do understand that some people might not necessarily know what even the party funding is about, because it's relatively a new I'd like that you take us through on the basics of what the Act is about and what it means for the rest of South Africa.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna try and keep it short and hopefully interesting, because to talk about the Act, maybe sometimes it seems a little bit boring, but it really is. It is quite important, and you are absolutely right. It is very new. So first thing to say is that since 1994, so since the onset of democracy, we have never actually had a piece of legislation that tells us precisely who can donate to a political party, how they need to source private donations, and dictating that they need to be transparent in reporting on that money for the public. So that's just the first thing. So what I also think is very important, that I don't think we really realize, is just like ordinary people, voters, is that political parties can get money from two ways. So on the one hand, if I were a political party, I could get money from public funding. Public funding is basically what you and I pay. It's our taxes. It's our taxpayer money. So everybody's taxes obviously gets pooled in the national budget. The government will say for what it is they want to allocate this. One of that is actually for political parties. So if you are a political party and you have a seat in parliament, so that's national parliament, or if you were voted in your province, so provincial parliaments, then you are actually going to receive money. Right, so that's the one space that you can get money from. That's from the public purse, national treasury. The other side of it is what we just very broadly call private funding. Private funding is from any person, ordinary person, you and me, a business, as long as you are not part of the state, as long as you're not a state-owned company, as long as you're not actually part of the national budget, completely separate, you are classed as being a private donor. Okay, so The act that we have now as a bit of a long title, but it's the Political Party Funding Act. And it only talks about private funding. So only this one bit that is really about the private individual, businesses, business owners, you and I, all of those kind of things, right? And why this is important, and I don't think I need to go into great detail about it, that we all know about state capture, we all know about corruption, we all know that sometimes you have a politician who's voted into a particular position and they're not actually doing what you want them to do. And what we have seen is that our politics seems to be purchased quite literally by very wealthy individuals. So I could be a really big business owner giving quite literally millions to a political party, not necessarily because I like the party, which I can, but in some instances, it's because I want something back from you if you were voted into some position of power. And that's really where the act comes in. It's meant to stop that kind of opportunities from taking hold. It doesn't stop private donations as a whole. You can still donate. You are more than welcome to, but it specifies that if you donate more than 100,000 Rand to a political party, the political party must declare it. And the way they declare it is they fill out a form and they submit that form to the IEC. And every quarter, which is every 3 months, the IEC needs to publish that. I, as a donor, can only donate a maximum of 15 million Rand to a party, but that's only to one party. So let's say I donate the full amount of 15 million Rand to party X, I can still donate another 15 million Rand to party Y and to party Z. Yes, it's not as a whole, it's just per party, per donor per party. So I think that's to be clear on that. And the other thing also to be clear about is that just because you only see a few names on the sort of disclosures that the IEC publishes doesn't mean that other political parties aren't receiving money. It just means that what they are saying is that we have not received money that's at the declared amount, which is 100,000 Rand and above. They could still be receiving amounts way below that, which they must still keep track of with ordinary accounting principles. It's not like you can get money, 10,000 Rand, and pretend you didn't get it. You still have to account for that. And that 100,000 Rand is what we call a cumulative total. So in other words, let's say this quarter, I donate 50,000 Rand. And in the next quarter, I donate another 50,000 Rand. Together, that obviously makes 100. And so now you must declare. So that's to kind of stop people from wanting to circumvent the thresholds, to stop them doing 99,000 here and then 99,000 in another quarter and then problems. No. So it's a cumulative amount. And then lastly, the other big thing is that the Act prohibits foreign funding. So it's exactly what the title says. Foreign is anything outside the borders of South Africa. So foreign business people, foreign entities, foreign state-owned companies, all of those things, it's prohibited. However, and this is the very important part, you can accept foreign funding if the foreign funding is termed political purpose. So if it is for skills development, training development, policy development, or more broadly, what we call political purpose, which is what it says in the Act, then you can in fact accept money. So we have seen, for example, the DA was one of those parties who had foreign funders. In the last disclosure period, which was at the end of August, they declared, for example, that they received money, and that was for the training of some of their municipal officials, and that came from a foreign funder. So technically no, but yes, if you say it's for political purpose. And that's just bare bones what the Act is. Some of the highlights, I think the most important things that people will probably engage with.
Okay, this is a lot to comprehend, in the sense that at one point you're trying to cap the the corruption, the selling, but there's still an allowance that you can donate to this party and this party, and mostly you are actually buying your ground in different political parties, which then says, are we really at that point of curbing the situation then? Because I could buy my ground from this party while I buy on another one in case this one goes out.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly what it is, and that is our concern. So I'm not going to pretend that the act isn't important, because it is. So some of the things that we have felt was going on, you've kind of been vindicated by seeing that in the disclosures, in some of the trends that we've slowly been able to see. Because remember, we've only had a year of this, so it's still like a baby, it's still new, there's still more information that we hope to gather. But what's become apparent is that there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it there already. Let's say I'm not actually interested necessarily in making democracy work in the sense of it must be representative of everybody. I must feel that I have a say, my concerns are actually being taken seriously. I could just be somebody, for example, who's donating money to political parties because I'm hedging my bets. I want to make sure that the political party that's going to institute the most favorable circumstances for me, and in most cases, that's for you to do business, for you to make more money. That's what I'm going to do. And we have seen some major donors who appear to be doing that. So for example, there was a large donation to the DA. In one go, 15 million Rand was donated by a businessman in one go. So the cap was met. Then in the next quarter, this businessman donated 7.5 million Rand to Action SA. Now, they are, of course, not the same party, by no means, but they do share a lot of the same or perhaps overlapping political ideology. So one could perhaps use it as an example and say, well, maybe what you are donating for is not maybe because you happen to like the DA, you happen to like Action SA, sort of just idealistically speaking, but maybe it's because you think that these two parties, if you back them long enough and with more money, when they do eventually come into whatever position of political power, it's going to make things more favorable to you. And that's a big problem. And we don't yet have a one-size-fits-all solution for how we can stop that.
Yeah, because I could imagine also that even if a party is not currently the leading party, but if you consolidate parties like that, you could actually have power even before they get into that to a leading party position, because there's a lot of influence they currently have in parliament. So if there are policies that you find favorable to certain businesses you have, and you have these different parties pulling together for that one policy, they're most likely to come in large numbers, which is very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, tricky is very nice. It's a very nice way of saying it. It is very tricky. It is very tricky because the issue that we're trying to engender is that we want a reversal of the current political culture that we seem to have. And that's the political culture, which is one that seeks self-enrichment instead of public service. So there are many academics who will talk about why this is the case, but the fact is that this is what seems to be the situation at present. And what this means is that, just if we look at what the Political Party Funding Act has given us in the last year, every single political party that declared they receive money over that 100,000 Rand threshold amount, each and every single one of them had 2 to 3 donors. They'd made up between 50 and 70% of their overall private donations. In other words, most of their money was coming from 2 to 3 individuals or 2 to 3 businesses, right? What this means is that we have a situation where our political parties are only seeking funding and support from a very, very small group of people, very, very small elite group of businesses. And what if you want a democracy, if your understanding of a democracy is that it is representative of every single person in the country, and that is not a situation that you can actually uphold. And the PPFA is just one step in trying to reverse that. We're actually trying to move to a space where it's broad-based people support, where what the political party is drawing on is not the influence and power that they get from big spenders, but instead of feeling like, oh, if I don't do this, my money guy is not going to be there anymore, it should be, if I don't do this anymore, my voter is not going to support me anymore. Mm-hmm. And that is the tricky situation, is that while the PPFA is important, we can see some trends emerge, it's just one piece of the puzzle. There's so many things that we have to do to rectify the situation that you've just brought up now.
As you were doing your presentation, you mentioned that some of the political parties have not received that large sum of money. And I was looking at the political parties that had declared. I personally, from my understanding, I find it hard that certain political parties have not received that much for them to declare. Do you, from your perspective, see it or believe that there's some resistance towards the act and what it seeks to do, when it's quite an accountability tool now? You accounting to your constituencies as to who's influencing your decision making at the end of the day, because the one who gives you money influences most of the time your decision making.
No, absolutely. I think there's obviously an issue. I think there are some political parties who genuinely have welcomed it, but for others who, and I'm not necessarily saying this was for illegal purposes, but just because the setup of their finances has been such that they have only focused on 3 or 4 major donors, and they received lots of sort of like unchecked money from these donors, that this act now does represent sort of a problem, but like teething problems, like how do we actually implement this? And now it's a situation of, oh my word, we've never had to think beyond person A, B, C, and D to look for money, but maybe we should actually. So I think there's been some of those sort of teething issues. But then there have also been political parties who have actually come out and say that the act doesn't do what it thinks it should be doing, which is increasing accountability and transparency. Some political parties have said it decreases that. In my opinion, I would wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. We have seen a culture of secrecy in our politics in many areas, including when it comes to money. And we have now reached a climax, a point where we cannot actually keep at this level, because we've reached a breaking point. So people do need the ability to be able to scrutinize. And one of the major criticisms against the act has been that it stifled the ability of political parties to raise money, because now they former donors, big donors are shy. And the question that I would like to level there is why? If you are donating because you like your party, if you believe in democracy, what does it matter if we see your name? What really is the issue in just being transparent? We are not assuming that because you donate, you are doing something wrong, but we reserve the right to, when you donate, have the opportunity and the right to scrutinize that donation and make sure that everything's above board. There's nothing untoward about that. And so, yeah, there has been some teething issues with it. We've seen some political parties, most notably the governing party, the ANC, who have come out and said the PPFA is the root of all their financial woes at present, which personally I don't really think that's accurate. For example, they've blamed it in terms of not being able to raise enough funds and they're not able to pay their staff. But if we just look at that issue, staff payments has been a long-standing issue for the party well before the implementation of the act. You'll also see they continue to be, throughout each set of disclosures, the #1 party in terms of how much money they bring in. So for the first year of the PPFA, they brought in just under 67 million rand, just for that 1 year. Plus, remember I said you can also get public funding. And because they hold the most seats in the National Assembly, they receive a bigger portion of public funding. So I think it would be a bit disingenuous just to lay the problems of your finances solely at the feet of the PPFA. It's not trying to stifle your ability to fundraise. It's just saying be open and honest about it. But it has caused some issues.
I find it sneaky and dodgy that it'll get to a point where you're saying you're unable to fundraise. So it makes me question what ways were you using to fundraise? Because when I was reading the act, it also speaks that into that the donor must have made the money legally.
Yeah.
So it speaks a lot into question as to what the country is currently faced with, where there's corruption like on a day-to-day basis, and for a leading party being the first to complain about the act says a whole different thing altogether. But before you comment, I also want to throw in the question as to, wouldn't that be the reason why it has taken so long for us to have the act? I mean, 27 years into only, we are in 28 now, but we only got the act on the 27th year, and things have been going south. And it's not that we don't have an experience of what happened during the apartheid and how certain companies were influencing the government into a certain, so it's something we should have seen a long time ago and should have been the first thing to implement from the beginning.
No, 100%. And I think your summation there could very well be the case. Is that because of the situation of you have these donors who are giving you money, you're unwilling to change that. And so we've waited so long. And you're right, 27 years into democracy was the very first time that we had this kind of legislation. And it's not just the ANC who has been against the act, or coming out rather with criticisms. But from the very beginning, My Vote Counts was by no means the first organization to call attention to the fact that it's a constitutional right that we have. Access to information is enshrined in our constitution. And we need to make sure that we have laws that properly give effect to this. Way back in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, another NGO, IDASA, actually took the 4 largest political parties to court at the time because they had submitted requests, formal requests for access to information around party funding documents, and each one of those parties denied them. And they said that you don't have the right to ask us this. So from that first formal application to when MVC won a high court case about access to information in 2018, that's 15 years already. Then we still had another few years after that to have an amendment to our Access to Information Act and to have an entirely new act about party funding. So it's been exceptionally long. And so that's why I say, there are issues with the act, but we should look at it as a way of where can we strengthen it? What can we do to find other ways to make this better? Because it's taken us almost 3 decades to get it in the first place. And it's sorely needed.
Sure, this paints a picture of our politics. And I think for a person who follows politics, they could easily make certain conclusions as to what's going on in our politics. Why is everything just crumbling? I mean, as a country, we've been, stage 4 of ESCOM. It's been crazy into what is happening. We have SOEs falling apart. So just by this conversation, you're able to make connections to other conversations into looking into the country. And in that, my question then will be, what role does the public have when these declarations come out? Yes, these parties are making the declarations. What then do we say as a public, without waiting for the next vote, which I would imagine to say, okay, because this party does not want to declare, then we don't want to have them in power, we'll opt for another one. But in the immediate moment, what do we do when these declarations come out?
I think one of the most powerful ways, obviously, and you've mentioned it, that you can show your dissatisfaction with any government, any official, is when you go to the ballot box, just to not vote for them. But as you say, between national elections, we have a 5-year period. So what is it that you do? So by no means will I dictate this is exactly how you should act. But I think if we talk about the declarations, what you can actually do is just agitate with the information. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, and you're following your ward councillors, your mayors, any representative, ask them, why haven't you declared? What are you doing with this money? What can you show me? Because we need to show that when this information comes out, we care about it. It doesn't just go out in a vacuum. So us at MVC, what we aim to do is just to constantly put it out in the public. This is what it is. See it, and you take it and you run with it. It's to have conversations like this that you can, okay, this is what this means, especially when we go up to the national elections. And you can say, well, in these 5 years, actually, I've been tracking, I've been following you, and ultimately I'm not going to vote for you. As a bloc, you could do strategic voting and decide instead we are actually going to vote for whomever else. But I think with the information, it's really up to you how you want to hold your elected officials to account. So if you belong to Party X and Party X has not declared anything at all, send a DM and ask, but why? Why?
It's time to
Yes, there shouldn't be this wall around just because you are an elected official, you hold some position of political power, that you are off limits. And I mentioned earlier about we have a political culture where it's private, very wealthy private individuals that have sway. We need to show that the sway does not sit there, it sits with us. And the only way we can do that is to continue to push the conversation forward with the people who are actually in positions of power. It's good that we have the conversation so that you can understand, we can bounce ideas of one another. But ultimately, I'm not a minister. I'm not the mayor. I'm not the premier. I wouldn't be able to say, I can't account for what the political party has done. I can perhaps just shine a light on that. So if you have civic associations, join them to ask the questions. Do you know what I mean? I think that is what you want to be able to mobilize with this kind of information.
And I'm glad you're saying this within the Wesley Guild SA, because a lot of young people that are within the Wesley Guild, they're very political active, and it's very, very vocal young people. So I am hoping that then they'll take it up further into that. And just to ask, before I read what you guys had published, there's a threshold of 15 million. What is the implication for a party that exceeds the threshold?
That's actually a little bit of a tricky question. Remember I said it's 15 million rand per year per political party. So as I said, if I've donated 50 million rand to Party A, but then also 50 million rand to Party B, I haven't committed any crime. I'm not in contravention of the act. So if something like that is happening, then there'll be no recourse, right? But let's say I am trying to donate in 1 year, one financial year, 20 million rand to Party A. Then in the act, there are very clear repercussions that will be enforced. So the IEC oversees the act. They disperse any funds that come through it. They check compliance, all of those things, obviously publish the declarations, so they can issue fines. And they can take the offending political party to the electoral court, and through there they can then issue fines. And you'll see right at the bottom of the act there's a schedule. It's just a basic table that says if this is what you've done wrong, then this is the amount. And if you only offended once, then it's this. If you offended twice, then it's this. So there is financial repercussions, and the IEC can also withhold funding, if it's coming through for a certain political party, if they seem to be in contravention of one or other aspect of the act. So when they released the most recent disclosures at the end of August, they mentioned there as well that they are trying to put together a panel of experts, financial people, auditors, where so the only way that the IEC can investigate is if somebody actually lodges a formal complaint. And they say, I think that this party is not following ABC in the act. Then the IEC with this panel will be like, okay, we've noted it. Now we're actually going to investigate. So the IEC is trying to capacitate itself to properly give effect to investigating if a political party does something wrong. And as I said, they can be fined and funds can be withheld from them.
Okay, one last question and then we move to Sibusiso. So when on the 30th of August, My Vote Counts released the statement on the declarations for this quarter. And so two things that are notable is that the ANC disclosed an amount of 10 million from an entity called Botu Commercial Enterprise, of which the ANC benefactor, Patrick Motsepe, is solely the director. And since April 2021, Motsepe's companies have donated just over 21 million or 21.7 million to the governing party, accounting for 28% of the party's overall donations. That's a huge percentage. Just a question that I'm going to have on there, then, but I'd like you to answer at the end with all of them, is what happens when one funder is using different companies to donate? And secondly, on the second paragraph, it says, similarly, Fibos, a repeat donor to DA, who's a director, has been high-ranking member of the party, donated 15 million to the party since 1 April. The company has donated 32.5% of the party's total private and disclosed donation. If this was a company that is listed on JSE, this is a person who has so much voting power into the company, because anything above 25% in terms of your shares, that buys you a lot of voting power and say. And what does this mean for us then as a country?
Well, so I'll take your first point about, multiple companies, like what happens there. The short and unsatisfactory answer is nothing. And I'll explain, I'll explain why. So the way in which the PPFA is drafted is that you can donate as a natural person. In other words, as an ordinary person, you're not a business, you're just you, or as a juristic person. In other words, as a business entity. So I, as Robyn, I can have a flower business. My flower business is going to donate 15 million Rand to Party A. Robyn, as a person, can also donate 15 million Rand to that same party, because there's a distinction made, because it's coming from a business entity, a legal entity, and a difference between a normal person making that. So in Patrice's case, for example, he has donated through African Rainbow Minerals, through Harmony Gold, two of his mining companies. He's donated to the ANC. He's also donated to other political parties as well. With the Botu Commercial Enterprise, initially, when we did some investigation, his name doesn't come up. You can Google it. Okay, maybe now that we've said it in the media, but when you don't actually see it, you have to really dig into who is on the board of directors, and then you see, oh, Patrice is the sole director. But these are three separate businesses. So these count as three separate entities making a donation, which under the PPFA is in fact acceptable. So what we are trying to call attention to is that the PPFA needs to have clearer language around that. And you need to actively declare your interests as well when you give your monetary donation. So if I, Robyn, have donated 15 million Rand, on my form, I should also say, but I sit on this company as a director and this company as a director and this company as a sort of board of trustees, so that we can have a list, because it has become apparent that you can just, so to my earlier point where I said that if I can actually donate more to a party, even though 15 million Rand is it, if I'm doing it that way, unfortunately, no, it's not a contravention of the Act. With Fynbos Equitate, with the DA, you're absolutely right. So technically speaking, Fynbos Equitate for the rest of the financial year cannot donate to the DA because they've reached 15 million Rand. But let's say Michel Leroux, who is the major shareholder there of that company, if he decides he wants to give 50 million Rand, he can, because he's not a business. His business is, but let's say he also has another business. Let's say it's Protea Equitate. They can also give 15 million Rand. So this is an issue, because the Act doesn't, nowhere does it stipulate that you need to track those funds. So we are trying to call attention to that look, this is an issue. Again, we can't assume that you are trying to circumvent because you are trying to be illegal or trying to be a criminal, but we also want you to be clear and transparent. So just tell me up front, then I know. But yes, this is an issue. And to your last question, it causes great concern for how we want our democracy to unfold. Because we wanted, as I said, and I've said it quite often this evening, we want transparency. We want you to be open. Just say it to me up front. We've come out of the State Capture Commission inquiry, and it went on for years to a point where I'm sure many people were like, again, more, because there was just so many things that came out of this. And I think that is one of the most clear examples of why you actually need a framework that tells you you need to be open with your constituents, open with your voters. But unless we actually sort of amend the Act to talk to those issues that I've just mentioned now, we are gonna continue to have that problem, and it will only get bigger. It will become an issue.
This is one of the many things I dislike about this country. Half the time is when we, to a certain extent, being symbolic. Where government puts in these acts, but leave them so ambiguous and so loosely that you can't really, you can only stretch so far in terms of their implementation. And even organizations like My Vote Counts get to have certain limitations because they've deliberately, because I believe it's deliberate, that they've deliberate, because if you could look at different policies that have been set out, the trend is the same. The government makes it so loosely that to an extent you wouldn't do much to them. But the sad part about it, which is I'm happy with My Vote Counts, is that the public never gets to have an idea of what's going on. For example, even myself, I didn't understand all those technicalities. And I see the limitations now. If you're going to have a company and a person being, yes, I understand it's two separate entities, but at some point, if I'm a sole proprietor of that company and I also donate, I would say it should be looked at as the same person, because that's actually you trying to stretch yourself by donating 15 million this side, because at the end of the day, your company does not have a say. You are the person who has a say, because you are a human being. So I think with that, for me, it poses a lot. But please stay on the line, Robyn, because we're going to have a lot of questions if the people who are posing questions. But I want to go to Sibusiso Maneli. So welcome. I know you've been on the behind the scenes waiting for us to give you a chance. But I wanted Robyn to give us a ground and basics of this act before you jump in, because with you, we're looking at the broader spectrum of what this means. And the first question I have from a political perspective and the economic perspectives, what is firstly the party funding means for the rest of the country and the political parties? Hi, Sibusiso.
Hi.
Good
evening. First and foremost, I'd like to say I'd like to apologize for arriving late.
Although your camera is on,
but you can't see me, right?
Yeah.
I'm having a little problem with my camera.
Okay, no, it's fine then. It's fine.
But yeah, I think it's fine now, is it?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, look, your question is fundamental, and I think Robyn did a good thing of laying out the regulatory perspective and the context around what is the landscape of the policy framework in South Africa in the South African context. But I think we need to look at this in a much more broader context. Answering directly your question, I think anyone who has done economics at a high education level, the first lesson you are taught is there's no such thing as free lunch. And it actually can mean figuratively and literally. Mm-hmm. And we need to then understand what that means for companies who give out millions to these political parties. And most of the times, these businesses don't even believe in the ideals of these political parties, right? And this has to do with the political economy of policy making and its implementation in their own interests, you understand? Hence, I want to introduce like a simple concept of the principal and agent relationship. And that is what effectively is happening. Businesses use political interests to advance, political parties to advance their profit interests. Meaning that if I own a mine company and I fund the leading party today in South Africa, I need to get something back. So there's no free lunch for the ANC or the DA or the EFF, whoever is in charge. Now, that has two effects. It is an effect of maintaining certain political balances and economic structures that create what others would call inequality, or others would say opportunities for employment. Because if I fund the ANC and I tell the ANC that they need to relax union laws, then it means I'll get cheap labor. However, in return, more people will be employed. But what then would be the sociological effect of that unregulated employment, So there is a balancing act, both from the business perspective and the political parties themselves. Because at the end of the day, political parties themselves also need to maintain self-preservation. So through the use of political ideology to garner support, so that even those who don't own the means of production fall in line with what they perceive to be revolutionary ideals of the political party. Whilst at the same time, the same political party is serving the interests of those who exploit the members of the political party. So it's a double-edged sword, You have to look at it from a literal perspective of, I am giving you money, you must give me something. But also in in the political economy space, there are nuances that we must understand, that there are balancing acts of configurations of power as well within that space. There's configuration of the level of power each can disperse. We all understand the fact that the ANC is the leading party in South Africa and its leading government, right? And then we would all assume that it has every right and it's in position to make any decision that it deems fit. But however, at a policy development and implementation level, they need to consider certain sections of society's interests. That is why when we were complaining or when we were fighting for FISMAS 4, we were told that we're going to chase away investors. And when a lot of people were speaking about nationalizations of mines without compensation, and obviously expropriation of the land, where the ANC started telling us about how the rand would be affected, how we would lose foreign direct investment and we'll end up like Zimbabwe. And that is the actual reality, that business interests directly influence policy making in countries. You see. So basically, in summary, I can even give you examples of different countries at a different levels of development. For instance, even the most developed democracy in America still faces the same situation, faces the crisis around how do they navigate the question of political party funding. Well, unlike South Africa, though, it's not a multi-party democracy, but you have the Democrats and then you have the Republicans. And both of these political institutions are contesting for political space in the White House. However, though, because of the same political economy dynamics that I'm talking about around interest on who is responsible or who determines policy directions, is the same situation that we have, that business interest or capital in the most strategic aspects of policy making are at the center of influence. So even the president of the United States, the most democratic and advanced, economically speaking country, is still subject to string pulling from certain sections of the American society, specifically the American military complex, where a lot of military contractors or those who own companies that are at the center of military contracting are the ones who are lobbying, are the ones who are in charge of influencing policy directions in the United States. And how then the United States formulates its foreign policy and economic policy, it needs to consider the interests of the military oligarchs in the United States. Another example, again, South Africa. You have a South African government that is in charge of the most democratic constitution, but it has only released the same act that Robyn was speaking about only recently, which still is struggling with being able to capacitate the state as at the bedrock of tender premierism, at the bedrock of rent seeking and maintaining certain political sections of society happy, especially the white minority happy. Now, you have a developing country that is facing the same problem and a developed country that is facing the same problem, albeit at different levels. And the most extreme of the spectrum would be the situation currently in Libya, where different political interests, both globally and domestically in Libya, support and fund different governments of the same country that are in conflict. A conflict-ridden country that no one is willing to save, rather they would fuel the conflict such that they're able to benefit from the oil reserves that exist in Libya by obviously supporting one government that is in Tripoli or the government in Trabak perspective. So hence I initially spoke about power configurations and the power dynamics that are existing in the context of political party funding and what that means for policy for policy outcomes and imperatives.
Yeah. Okay. Getting a perspective of all of this just made my head go wild, and literally just think about it gives me a headache. But what I'm getting, the bottom line is the voters don't necessarily have much influence.
No. Look, I admired how Robyn was explaining the concept of democracy in the context of policy making, government making policy, and being beneficial to the majority of the people. And obviously, democratic processes being a consequence of that. However, democracy in itself does not exist outside of the prism of the distribution of power. Distribution of power in the sense. Look, power can be literal and figurative as well. The bottom line here is the fact that capital has a much more bigger power configuration than government, because capital have capacity to collapse government for their own interests. So one day, if VW and all of these foreign capital companies, even Rupert one day would decide to just take out their money and just leave, the first people the citizens would blame would be the ANC government or whichever government that would be in place at the time, forgetting the fact that government in the context of a capitalist system are just but managers of the affairs of the ruling class. Essentially what I mean is a government sits there to maintain the class interests of those who are feeding them. So if you are talking about the restructuring of the economy, you must first look at who is leading that policy perspective and what are their class interests. Because at a political economy level, actors are only pushed to make certain decisions because of their own self-preservation and for their own self-interests. And same as policy, the same policy that we're speaking about today that is in existence in South Africa with regards to political party funding. Who are those who are most challenging it? The ruling party is number one. The DA has been flip-flopping around the policy and we have not had anything concrete from the EFF. And those are major political parties that have been benefiting the most from domestic and international capital for various reasons. I mean, I am raising all of these things to going back to a question that democracy as a system is like, it's like giving a child a candy, and you say, you see this candy, you must not eat it until you have finished grade 12. You are saying that to a child that is in grade 1. And when they get to grade 12, you tell them that I ate that thing 11 years ago. So what are we going to do? Now, it is precisely based on the fact that we need to reimagine, as Africans and South Africans particularly, to reimagine then, does a multi-party democracy system really works as we have been told it works? And what other types of democracies probably we can begin to look at in order for our voices as normal citizens to be heard? Because I can assure you today, even if all members of any political party can tell you, we don't want to do something, as long as those who own the means of production are benefiting from that, they will always find a way of coercing political parties that are living in government to maintain their own self-interest. So that is why then I'm raising the question of, what does democracy mean in the context of a globalized world? What does democracy mean when foreign and domestic capital is able to influence even the judiciary itself? You know, a recent case in the United States, I think in the Obama administration, where Obama could not appoint a Supreme Court judge based on the interests of the American military complex, because the judge seemed to be against the wars that America was waging at the time. Now, do you see how deep the question of the principal and agent relationship is? We have the principal, which is capital, that is attempting at all costs to protect its interests. And you have the agent, who is government, that is only but managing the affairs of the principal. And I think we need to reimagine then a society that is not necessarily immune, but is able to mitigate such capital bullying, you know.
Yeah, no, I think then the next conversation we really need to have is around the systems of governance. Having been to a few countries, and China being one of them, and China being a communist party system, and whatever that means for them and how. But having been there, I often get asked, would I choose home or would I choose China? Part of me would choose China, part of me would choose South Africa. The only reason I would choose South Africa, one is because of its freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want to say. But if I was looking at the economical side of things, I'll definitely choose China, because people are able to live on a day-to-day basis, but without the freedom of speech. So the government dictates, but it seems like them dictating allows the citizens to live afloat. So you get to your poison then. I think the next conversation should really be about that, because now the conversation brings a really deep question as to what really democracy means, and what does it actually mean for my grandmother what does it mean for me as a young graduate in South Africa? Do I really have influence into what is happening in the country? Or is some false sense of I can go and vote, I can go on Twitter, I can do all of these things, but does that really have an influence? I'm going to ask you your last questions, and then anyone both on Facebook and on the Zoom, if you're on the Zoom, can you please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment? We are close into closing the session. With all of this, navigating this difficult terrain, because from today, I'll never be bold enough to say certain things because my understanding has changed of things. And just on the last session we had, a week before last, was talking about borders, open borders. And again, it came back to the issue of the economy. It came back to the issue of the politics of the economy. And in that regard, one of the panelists raised an issue of decolonizing the economy. So the decolonization agenda then stretches further from education to the economy. And in that, how do we navigate such terrains? Robyn has mentioned the secrecy around political parties in South Africa, whether it's on funding, whether it's on policy. There's so much secrecy. As young people of South Africa, you are speaking to young people of the Methodist Church who are also politically active in different parts of the country, of political parties. As young people, with all this, what do we do? How do we have a genuine influence? Because at the current moment, I feel like it's a false influence from where I'm standing. If I'm being, yes, voting, going there and vote, but if it's continuing on the same status quo, if it's continuing on the same economic status and system, I feel like it would deter a lot of us from even going voting, because you move party A and party B still continues on the same thing. So again, the conversation we've always been having, that the problem is the entire structure and system. How do we as young people navigate that space and have influence into a real change? And what would that real change look like at this epoch? Hi,
Yes. I'm back. Apologies. I think fundamentally, the question of just transformation, any kind of transformation, be it we're talking about decolonization, or we're talking about radical information transformation, we're talking about socialism. I think fundamentally, there's always been a question of how do we do these things? And all of these terms and isms have been in existence for quite a long time, through obviously theoretical development. But I think for me, the first things first is to lay ground for cooperation. I think at a genuine civic level, we need to build grassroots networks and organizations that are solely focused on these particular issues of housing, issues of security, issues of LGBTQI plus issues that deal with education transformation and grassroots organizations, so that you have a much more conscientized and mobilized citizenry. Because look, I can write papers till kingdom come. If I'm not mobilized within a certain community, then I will not have the same impact that I would have had I had a network of people. Yeah. And I think another aspect is the fact that academics need to come to the party. Yeah. Academics cannot continue sitting in their air-conditioned offices and writing papers about things and about people and saying they're producing knowledge for people, by the people, yet those people don't even get a sniff of that knowledge, you understand? And the other week you said something that was quite interesting, that we do research, we write papers about people for people that they never get to understand, they never even get to see, which that's why I'm saying academics also need to come to the party. But more importantly, history is littered with examples about how young people, active participating young people, have overthrown governments, how young people have been at the center of transformation, and how young people have been able to reshape an intergenerational history of a particular terrain. And I think that is where we need to begin. I think we need to draw from those lessons, the historical lessons around how we can mobilize each other, not for the sake of mobilizing only, but mobilize each other around a common goal. Look, you can call it radical transformation, economic transformation. I can call it socialism. Another one can call it decolonization. But I think we need to have
Hi, Sibusiso. Sorry, I think we lost him. Is there anyone who has a question here? And the question that was on the Facebook Live, sorry, Nkosi, but I think he was coming into answering part of it around, is it possible to overthrow the current system? And he was still just rightly unpacking on what can be done in working towards that. Whether is it possible or not, we need to get back firstly on the basics of it in understanding the system and moving into finding a common ground and ultimately decide as to what we want to do with the system. Is there anyone who has a question here on Zoom? Before I can give Robyn a chance to do a closing, and then we end today's session, which has been a mind-blowing one. And whatever you're thinking, going back home, it really needs us to think deep as to what society looks like for the rest of us. At the moment, I'm not seeing anyone who's raising their hand. Robyn, I'm going to come to you and just for you to just share with the young people, how do they get involved even with My Vote Counts? I know you also have, is it Best Friends, the organization? I think it's that you guys also work in, just organization that they can follow into engaging deeply with the content, and ultimately we could make a broader change when people from the grassroots do get to be involved.
Absolutely. First, let me just say again, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you and to the viewers. But it's always a really interesting conversation to have. And it's good that we also step out as civil society organizations outside of our usual conversations with other civil society organizations, and have this conversation actually filter down to everybody else and have them be involved in the conversation. And I mean, unlike Sibusiso, I think my inputs were, focused on really like nuts and bolts conversation about what is the act, what can you do, what does this tell us? But I think this is just one small cog in a very broad conversation around, I think specifically, what is funding of our politics? What does this mean for representation? It obviously leads into questions of economics, power, how do we actually want to be governed? So there are many conversations that you can take forward from this, and I hope that you continue to do that. There's so many things that you can bring into it. But just onto your point, if you would like to be involved with any of the work that MVC does, You can obviously follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. We also regularly have webinars which you can attend, and that's for a whole host of people. So we invite academics, we invite activists, other civil society organizations, and we just encourage any interested party just to listen and follow along. We also work closely with similar organizations to ourselves. So we work very closely with organizations like Corruption Watch, and there, if you want to really like very finely in-depth discussion on corruption, they have some amazing resources. If you go on their website, out as well, the Organization for Undoing Tax Abuse. They also have some excellent reading materials, as do we on our website, blogs. You can have a look, reports as well. So there are many. If you look at our Instagram page as well, you can see who we follow. Just hit like, follow us, and then you can be kept up to date with the kind of events that we are doing. And hopefully we can come back sometime in the future and continue these kinds of discussions with everyone. But just thank you once again. It really was an honor to have this conversation with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Robyn. We got Sibusiso back. He got disconnected. Sibusiso, there's one last question, which is going to be your closing remarks also. Nkosimati from Facebook was asking, is it possible to overthrow the current system? And I think he was still navigating those terrains and trying to take us to a place where we could understand where we are and what could be our contribution. And you're speaking to young people of the Methodist Church who are very active. So I know this conversations that continue even in conferences. So yeah, would really like to have a broader understanding of, from a political perspective, for a person who studied the politics, geopolitics, who've traveled the world, engaging with different people from across the globe. What is your view?
Thank you again for the question. I think I'd be lying to say that I have a direct question. I mean, I have a direct answer, or I possess probably some sort of a strategy on how to change the system, number one, or are we even able to overthrow the government? I think the fundamental question that we must begin to ask, and I think Nkosinathi needs to ask himself this: do we really need to overthrow the government? And if we overthrow the government, then what would be the alternative? Secondary to that, another question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is it that we need to do in order for our voices to be heard? And I am saying, do we need to protest? Do we need to go the route of the Arab Spring? Or do we need to collapse the economy totally through other means? Or another alternative then is to be active citizens, such that we are so mobilized that we're able to hold government and businesses accountable. And when I say government, I include all arms of the state. You know, I include parliament, I include the executive, I include the judiciary as well. Because even the judiciary as well is at the center of protecting these interests, you know. So my response, and obviously my closing remark to Nkosinathi, is that I think we need to figure out what alternatives and options do we have, and what are we willing to sacrifice. Then we can take it from there. And I think I must say that this has been an interesting debate, in the sense that it gets one to think broadly about what it is that they themselves are doing, and how can we do better as young people, number one. And number two, how can we do better to protect our democracy and hard-won freedom, you know, because the South African freedom is bloody in the literal sense. And I think we have a responsibility then to safeguard it. We have a responsibility then to protect it from individuals, from political parties, even from those who we think are giving us work and giving us bread. We should not allow ourselves to be manipulated and exploited. So I'd like to thank you very much and thank the Methodist Church as well for this opportunity. And I think we need to have a much more broader discussion on what is democracy and what do we mean and how do we imagine democracy should be.
Look like. Thank you very much, Sibusiso, and thank you very much, Robyn. I think all that we've had today, I like it when we write papers and you're saying you're not coming with definite answers, but to broaden the conversation, because I think we have for so long wanted answers from people. And when those answers don't work out, we then say they didn't give us proper answers. I think each and every one of us have a responsibility to do their own reflection, to do their own reading, to craft their own contribution into the wider society. I mean, we're part of the biggest church in the country. And what are we doing as young people of the Methodist Church to conscientize our communities about these issues? What are we doing amongst ourselves and outside of ourselves in making sure that the democracy that we have work? We have a lot of young people that are not working. We have businesses of our fellows collapsing. There's a lot going on. And the question then boils down is to individually, what are we doing? But we cannot do it individually. It means at the end of the day, we also have to come collectively and work together. And from my side as your host, thank you very much. Within the Methodist Church, September is a youth month, and I'm happy that we're having such conversation during youth month, because as Sibusiso has mentioned, young people have always been at the center of change in society. And I would hope that as young people of the Methodist Church, as we are on the Youth Month, we really think about what could be our contribution towards a different South Africa in all those conversations that are happening, be it on decolonization, be it on gender issues, on LGBTIQ issues. We have an ESCOM problem. We have SOEs problems. What is our stance as young people of the Methodist Church? And that can only be crafted through conversation, but it must not end in conversation, but it must go further into action. And for me, your host, it's good night. And thank you for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.